The rain didn't just fall, it attacked. New York City was drowning under a sky that had cracked open, unleashing a torrent of biblical proportions. Thunder cracked overhead, a physical blow that rattled the thin, single-pane glass of her window. Eva Pierce flinched, her hand flying to her throat, a reflex she still hadn't unlearned. She was on the 4th floor of a walk-up in a neighborhood she couldn't name, and the sound still felt too close, too much like a door being kicked in. This was her life now, running, hiding. She was Eva Pierce, but she was also no one. She had arrived in the city 2 weeks ago with less than $300, a fake ID she'd bought in a bus station bathroom, and a set of memories she would have paid a fortune to erase. The memories were all of him, Maxwell. His name tasted like ash in her mind. Maxwell, with his charming smile that could captivate a room and his hands that knew how to control, how to hurt, how to leave bruises on the soul that no concealer could ever hide. He hadn't just hit her, he had owned her. He controlled what she wore, who she spoke to, when she ate. He was a cage, and for 2 long years, she had been his trapped bird, until she flew. Or rather, until she scrambled out of the window one night with nothing but the clothes on her back and a terror so profound it fueled her 3-day bus ride across 5 states. Now, this tiny apartment was her fortress. It was barely a room, just a box with a mattress on the floor, a hot plate that sparked dangerously, and a shared bathroom down the hall that always smelled of urine and despair. But it was hers. The door had 3 locks, and she checked them every 10 minutes. It was pathetic, but it was safe. She had found a job, a small mercy. A temp agency had placed her as a part-time barback at a cocktail lounge in Midtown. It was laughably upscale, a place of polished wood, hushed conversations, and drinks that cost more than her daily food budget. She washed glasses in a dark, steamy room in the back, invisible. The invisibility was the best part. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her, and she collected her meager paycheck in cash at the end of the week. She didn't know the owners, and she didn't care. It was money. It was a start. Eva stared at the rain-lashed window, her own reflection a pale ghost against the dark, roiling sky. She remembered the last time, Maxwell. His face purple with rage because she had spoken to the mailman. He had called her worthless, had reminded her that without him, she was nothing. His voice was a permanent echo in her head. "You'll never leave me. Eva, you're mine." She closed her eyes, forcing the memory down. He was wrong. She had left. She was here. She was breathing. She was building a new life, a life built on shadows and silence. No one could know who she really was. No one could ever connect the competent, quiet girl washing glasses to the terrified woman who had filed a dozen police reports that went nowhere. Her phone buzzed, a cheap burner she'd bought on Canal Street. Her heart leaped into her throat. She stared at it, vibrating on the warped wooden floor like a trapped insect. He had found her. He knew. She forced her shaking hand to pick it up. The number was one she barely recognized. It wasn't him. "Hello?" Her voice was a dry croak. "Evie, thank God, I've been calling your old number." It was Sarah, a girl she'd known from college, someone from the life before. "I got a new phone," Eva said, the understatement of the century. "Listen, I know things were weird when you just left," Sarah said, her voice fast and bright, oblivious to the chasm of fear on the other end of the line. "But I heard you were in New York. And I just heard about an opening, and it's... Evie, it's perfect. It's at Vertigo." Eva's blood ran cold, then hot. Vertigo. She'd heard of it. Everyone had. It wasn't just a bar. It was an institution. A place where celebrities, politicians, and the city's old money elite mingled in decadent, velvet-roped privacy. "Sarah, I'm just washing glasses." "No, listen. This is a real job. Waitress. Full-time. The tips are Evie. The girls there clear. Like $2,000 a week. A week my cousin's friend works there, and she said they need someone reliable. Like yesterday. Someone who looks the part. You know, classy. You were always classy. Classy? Eva looked at her chipped nails, her second-hand jeans. She felt like an imposter. But $2,000, that wasn't just survival money. That was freedom money. That was enough to get a real apartment, to change her name legally, to disappear so completely that not even a man like Maxwell could find her. I don't know, she whispered, the old fear creeping back. A place like that, she would be seen. People would look at her. Just go, please. The interview is tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Ask for Vivian, she's the manager. The line went dead. Eva stared at the phone. Vertigo. It was a world away from her dark, safe room. It was a spotlight, and spotlights were dangerous. But the thought of that money, of that escape, was a powerful lure. She stood up, her mind made. She had one good outfit, a simple black dress she'd kept from her old life, bought for a college formal. It was elegant, simple. She would wear her hair up, a tight, severe bun. No makeup. She would look professional, forgettable, efficient. She would go to the interview. She had to. She had run from Maxwell, from the violence, from the control. Now, she had to run towards something. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of something other than fear sparked inside her. It felt terrifyingly, like hope. She clutched the cheap phone in her hand and looked out at the storm. The city was a jungle, and she was just learning how to hunt. Her journey to freedom was just beginning, and it was leading her straight into the most exclusive and possibly most dangerous place in New York. Vertigo did not have a sign. It had a presence, carved into the facade of an old, Gothic revival building. The entrance was just a pair of imposing, 20-foot-tall mahogany doors and a single, heavy bronze V on the wall. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, the street was quiet, but the club still felt impossibly intimidating. Eva, in her simple black dress and tight bun, felt like a sparrow trying to blend in with peacocks. She had spent $10 she could not afford on a subway ride just to be here on time. A bouncer, a man so large he seemed less like a human and more like a piece of architecture, stood guard even in the daylight. He looked down at her, his face a mask of bored indifference. "We're closed," he rumbled. "I'm here for an interview," Eva said, her voice steadier than she felt. "With Vivian." The man's expression did not change. "No one's here." "She said 9 o'clock," Eva insisted, clutching her worn handbag. "Please, I'm supposed to meet her." The bouncer just stared at her. He was about to tell her to leave when the door opened a crack. A woman with sharp, jet-black hair cut into a severe bob peered out. Her eyes, lined in black, scanned Eva from head to toe in a single, assessing second. "You're Pierce?" the woman asked. Her voice was like gravel and silk. "Yes, Eva Pierce, for the interview." "You're late," the woman said, though Eva knew for a fact it was exactly 9 o'clock. "I'm sorry, the bouncer." "He's doing his job," Vivian snapped, opening the door wider. "Come in, through the back." She didn't lead Eva through the opulent, velvet-draped lobby Eva had seen in magazines. Instead, she was taken down a narrow, dimly lit service corridor that smelled of stale champagne and industrial cleaner. It was a jarring contrast, the raw mechanics behind the magic. Vivian moved with a quick, predatory grace, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the concrete floor. They went up a service elevator, not to the main floor, but higher. The doors opened into a hallway carpeted in thick, blood-red wool. It was silent here, the sounds of the city completely muffled. Vivian stopped at a door identical to the others and gave 2 sharp raps. "He's in," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "and he does not like to wait." Before Eva could even process who he was, a deep voice from inside called, "Enter." Vivian opened the door and gestured for Eva to go in, but she did not follow. Eva stepped inside, and the heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in. The office was vast, with a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked a private, rain-drenched garden. The room was dark, furnished with heavy, masculine pieces, and behind a desk the size of her entire apartment sat a man. It was not what she expected. She had imagined someone old, portly, with a cigar. This man was young, perhaps 30. He was tall, even sitting down, and wore a bespoke suit of charcoal gray that fit him like armor. His hair was black, his jaw was sharp, and his eyes were the color of a frozen lake, cold and impossibly deep. He was Sebastian Moretti. "Eva Pierce," he said. It was not a question. His voice was the same one from behind the door, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in the air. "Yes, sir," she said. He gestured to the single, uncomfortable-looking chair in front of his desk. She sat on the edge of it. He had a file in front of him, presumably her fabricated resume, but he never looked at it. His gaze was fixed entirely on her. "You've been in New York for 2 weeks," he stated. Eva's blood turned to ice. How could he know that? Yes, I'm looking for a fresh start." "A fresh start," he repeated, the words sounding hollow in his mouth. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. The movement was slow, deliberate. "You have no experience serving in a place of this caliber. You have no references worth a dime. You are, on paper, completely unqualified." Eva's hands were clammy. "I'm a fast learner. I'm reliable. I will work harder than anyone." Sebastian Moretti watched her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you here, Eva?" "For the job, to be a waitress." "No," he said, and the single word cut through her prepared speech. "Why are you here? Why run to a city this hard, with no money and no connections?" He leaned forward, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something behind the ice. "What are you running from?" The question hit her like a physical blow. It was too close, too real. It was exactly what Maxwell would have asked, but for different reasons. She felt the old, familiar panic rise in her throat, the desperate need to lie, to flee. She swallowed. "I'm just looking for a better life. The past does not matter." A long, tense silence filled the room. He stared at her, and she felt as if he were X-raying her, peeling back the layers of her composure to see the fear and desperation coiled beneath. He saw the shadow in her eyes, the practiced way she held herself, the subtle tension in her shoulders that spoke of long-term trauma. "You're right," he said softly, and the shift in his tone was more alarming than his interrogation. "The past does not matter here, only the present." He stood up. He was even taller than she'd thought, well over 6 feet, and he moved with a fluid, contained power. He walked to the window, staring out at the rain. "This job is not easy," he said, his back to her. "The clients are demanding. The hours are brutal. I demand absolute loyalty and discretion. You will see things. You will hear things. You will say nothing. Ever." He turned, his eyes finding hers again. "In return, you will be paid exceptionally well, and you will be protected. Our staff is family, Miss Pierce, and we protect our family." Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. Protected. The word was a balm and a threat. "I understand," she managed to say. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Vivian will get you fitted for a uniform. You start tonight, 8 o'clock. Do not be late." That was it. She was hired. Just like that. No questions about her non-existent wine knowledge, no requests for references. Just a conversation that felt more like a confession. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti," she said, standing up. "You will not regret this." "I know," he said, and his confidence was absolute. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Eva," she turned back. "Welcome to Vertigo," he said. His lips curved in a smile that did not reach his cold, assessing eyes. Eva hurried out of the office, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and a new, profound dread. She had the job. She had the money. But as she followed Vivian to the uniform closet, she could not shake the feeling of his gaze on her back, a feeling of being weighed, measured, and claimed. She was deeply uncomfortable with the intensity of his attention, the way he seemed to see right through her. But as she thought of the 3 locks on her door and the less than $300 in her bank account, she knew she had no choice. She needed this. She would just have to learn to be invisible, even to the man who owned the place. The polished, severe uniform of Vertigo became Eva's new armor. It was a simple, bias-cut dress in a black so deep it seemed to drink the low, ambient light of the club. It was tasteful, anonymous, and she disappeared into it. The work was demanding, more so than she could have imagined. It was not just carrying trays, it was an intricate dance of social navigation. She learned to read a table in 3 seconds, to know who needed another drink, who wanted to be left alone, and who was testing her. She learned the hierarchy quickly. Vivian was the floor general, a terrifying specter of efficiency. And then there was Natasha, the head bartender. Natasha was everything Eva was not. She was tall, with a cascade of fiery red hair and a laugh that could cut through the din of the club. She moved with an easy, practiced confidence, her hands a blur as she mixed cocktails Eva had never even heard of. "You're the new girl," Natasha had said to her on the 3rd night, not unkindly, as Eva fumbled an order slip. "Breathe, kid. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. It's just a lot," Eva admitted, her voice low. Natasha slid a glass of water toward her. "Rule number 1, do not look scared. These people can smell it. Rule number 2, the customer in booth 4, Mr. Henderson, always tips $100, but you have to pretend you do not know his name, even though he's here every Tuesday." "Got it." "Got it," Eva said, grateful. Natasha nodded, her expression sharp but warm. "Good, you'll be fine. You're quiet." "He likes quiet." "He, the big boss, Sebastian." Natasha turned away, already taking another order, and the conversation was over. Sebastian Moretti. In the 2 weeks Eva had worked at Vertigo, she'd only seen him twice, both times as a fleeting shadow. He did not walk the floor, he did not mingle, but his presence was an oppressive weight on the entire establishment. He had an office, she learned, on a mezzanine level, hidden behind a wall of one-way glass. He could see the entire club, every table, every transaction, every whisper, but no one could see him. Sometimes, Eva would be walking across the floor, her skin prickling with the distinct, agonizing feeling of being watched. She would scan the room, the bar, the alcoves, but there was no one. Only the dark, reflective glass of the mezzanine. It was a different kind of observation from Maxwell's. Maxwell's gaze had been a physical, demanding thing. He watched her to find fault, to accuse, to possess. It was the gaze of a predator who enjoyed playing with his food. Sebastian Moretti's gaze felt colder, more analytical. It was the gaze of a scientist studying a specimen. He was not looking for flaws. He was logging data. He seemed to be a man of impossible self-control. She never heard him raise his voice. She only heard the results of his quiet orders, the way a problem would simply disappear. He was not a man of explosive violence. Like Maxwell, he was a man of precise, terrifying solutions. He held meetings in the club after hours. Eva, staying late to polish silverware, would hear the low rumble of voices from the main floor. Always in the most secluded booth, she would see men in expensive suits, men with hard faces and watchful eyes, enter and leave through the back. She learned to make herself smaller, to finish her work and slip out the service entrance without being seen. Then came the night of the attack. It was a Thursday, the busiest night of the week. The club was thrumming, a sea of expensive perfume, low-murmured deals, and the clinking of ice in heavy crystal. Eva was navigating the floor, her tray perfectly balanced. She was serving booth 7, a private alcove often reserved for a quiet older gentleman named Mr. Altimari, a man Natasha had pointed out as one of Sebastian's oldest friends. The disruption was almost silent, which made it more terrifying. It was not a gunshot. It was the heavy, sickening thud of the front doors being forced, followed by a rush of cold air and the sudden, sharp gasp of the hostess. 3 men entered. They did not belong. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing heavy jackets, and they moved with a violent, purposeful energy. Panic rippled through the room like a wave. People froze. Vivian was already on her radio, her face pale. 2 of Sebastian's own security, the mountains in suits who stood by the elevators, moved to intercept, but one of the intruders broke away. He was faster, leaner. He scanned the room and his eyes landed on booth 7, on Mr. Altimari. the man lunged, not at Eva, but at the older gentleman. He grabbed the front of Mr. Altimari's suit jacket, yanking him up. "You come with us, old man," he snarled. Eva did not think. She did not plan. She reacted. The 2 years of terror under Maxwell had been a prison, but they had also been an education. She had taken exactly 3 self-defense classes at the YWCA before he found the brochure, tore it to shreds, and forbade her from ever going again. But she had been a desperate, attentive student. As the intruder pulled Mr. Altimari, Eva dropped her silver tray. It hit the floor with a deafening clatter. The man turned, momentarily distracted. In that second, Eva moved. She did not attack. She defended. She grabbed the man's extended arm, the one holding the old man's jacket. She planted her foot, sank her weight, and twisted her entire body. It was a simple joint lock. She used his own weight and momentum against him. There was a sharp, wet pop from the man's shoulder, followed by a high-pitched scream of agony that was cut short. He let go of Mr. Altimari, his face contorted in pure shock as he clutched his now useless arm. Eva stumbled back, shoving Mr. Altimari behind her, her body placed between him and the attacker, her hands raised. The entire event had taken perhaps 4 seconds. An eternity of silence fell, broken only by the man's pained gasps. Then, the club's own security descended. 2 of Sebastian's men grabbed the injured intruder and hauled him away like a sack of garbage. The other 2 intruders were already being neutralized at the door. It was over almost before it began. Eva was breathing hard, her body shaking with an adrenaline she had not felt since the night she ran from Maxwell. The room was spinning. Mr. Altimari was smoothing his jacket, his face pale but composed. He looked at Eva with a new, sharp interest. Eva's eyes darted around the room, landing on the mezzanine. He was there. Sebastian Moretti was not in his office. He was standing on the small, private balcony overlooking the floor, having clearly been in the middle of a meeting. He was not looking at the intruders being dragged out. He was not looking at Mr. Altimari. He was looking straight at her. His face was not angry. It was not worried. His cold gray eyes were alight with a startling, intense flicker of something. It was not just surprise. It was respect. He had seen. He had watched her move. He had hired a terrified, fragile girl, and he had just discovered that he had been entirely and dangerously wrong. After that night, the invisible line between employee and employer evaporated. Eva was no longer just another girl in a black dress. She was the girl who had dislocated a man's shoulder to protect one of Sebastian's oldest allies. The way the other staff looked at her changed. It was a mixture of awe and fear. Even Natasha gave her a long, appraising look over the bar. "Well, damn, quiet girl," she'd murmured, sliding Eva her end-of-shift drink. "You've got claws." But it was Sebastian's reaction that truly shifted her world. He was no longer a shadow on the mezzanine. He was a physical presence. He started appearing on the main floor, ostensibly to oversee operations, but his eyes always found her. He would be in a dark booth, speaking in low tones with men whose faces looked like they were carved from granite, but his gaze would lift, tracking her as she moved between tables. It was not the leering, hungry gaze of Maxwell. It was something far more unnerving. It was the look of an owner assessing his most valuable and most fragile possession. He did not speak to her, not at first. He just watched, and he began to send signals. A new, heavier-duty lock appeared on her apartment door one day, installed by a quiet man who said only, "Mr. Moretti's compliments." When her shift ended at 3 a.m, the same black car was always waiting, the driver wordlessly opening the door to take her the 12 blocks home. She was being protected, and she hated it. It felt like the velvet walls of a new, more expensive cage. The tension found a name about a week later, Marcus. He came into the club not as a customer, but as a guest of one. He was sharp, dressed in a suit that was too flashy, with a smile that showed too many teeth. He sat at the bar, and his eyes found Eva instantly. He ordered a drink. Not from Natasha, but from Eva, as she passed by. "You're new," he said, his voice oily. I would have remembered a face like that. Eva gave her polite, practiced smile. "Can I get you something, sir?" "Marcus, and you can get me a lot of things," he purred, his eyes raking over her. Before Eva could respond, a shadow fell over the bar. Sebastian was standing right behind her. Eva had not even heard him approach. "My apologies, Marcus," Sebastian said, his voice a blade of polished ice. "Miss, Pierce is busy. Natasha will take your order." Marcus's smile froze. He looked from Eva to Sebastian, and a flash of old, bitter understanding passed between the two men. "Moretti." "Always collecting strays. Are you—" "This stray is not for you," Sebastian replied, his meaning perfectly clear. "Enjoy your drink." He placed a hand on the small of Eva's back, a touch that was both a proprietary claim and a dismissal. He steered her away from the bar. "You do not speak to that man," he ordered, his voice low and guttural. "Ever. Do you understand me?" Eva pulled away, the heat of his hand burning her through the thin fabric of her dress. "He was a customer. I was doing my job. He's not a customer. He's a problem." "And what does that mean?" she challenged, her fear momentarily eclipsed by anger. "What are you going to do, solve him like you solve everything?" His cold eyes bored into hers. "Yes." Marcus was not at the bar the next night, or the night after. Eva finally asked Natasha where the man from the other night was. Natasha just shrugged, polishing a glass. Problems like that tend to take a long vacation, usually to the bottom of the East River. The casual violence of the statement made Eva sick. She ran to the bathroom, the reality of Sebastian's world crashing down on her. This was not a game. He was not just a protective boss. He was a man who made people disappear. The true breaking point came 2 nights later. Eva had refused the car service, desperate to reclaim one tiny piece of her independence. She told the driver she was staying for a drink with Natasha, a lie, and then slipped out the side exit 10 minutes after he had driven off. The air was cold, the street dark and mostly empty. She clutched her thin jacket around her, walking fast, her keys clutched between her knuckles, another old, sad habit. She made it 2 blocks. He came from a darkened alleyway, a man in a ski mask, moving with a terrifying speed. He did not say anything. He grabbed her from behind, one hand over her mouth, the other arm like a steel band around her waist, lifting her off her feet. The terror was instant and absolute. It was Maxwell. It was the alley. It was the end. She fought, using her skills, but he was prepared. He anticipated her elbow, catching it. She tried to stomp his instep, but he had her too high. Then, a black shape detached itself from the shadows across the street. It was not a car. It was a man, Sebastian. He moved with a speed that was inhuman. He crossed the street in 3 long, silent strides. The attacker, seeing him, made a fatal error. He threw Eva at Sebastian and turned to run. Sebastian caught her with one arm, setting her on her feet, and in the same fluid motion. His other hand went inside his jacket. "Go to the car," he commanded, his voice a low growl she had never heard. "What? No, Sebastian." He produced a firearm. The metal gleamed darkly under the streetlight. He was not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the retreating figure of the attacker. "Go, to the car, now." A black town car, the one she had dismissed, screeched around the corner. The back door flew open. Sebastian did not fire the gun. He simply held it, a dark promise. He shoved Eva toward the car. "Get in." This time she obeyed. She scrambled into the plush interior, her body shaking so violently she could barely breathe. Sebastian got in behind her, slamming the door. The car sped off. He was not looking at her. He was staring out the back window, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. The gun was still in his hand, resting on his knee. "Who was that?" Eva whispered, her voice trembling. "Was that Marcus, was it?" "It does not matter," he bit out. "It does matter," she suddenly screamed, the terror and anger and frustration of weeks, of years, bursting out of her. "It matters. You cannot just solve him. You cannot solve me." He finally turned to look at her. His gray eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide with adrenaline. "He put his hands on you," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "And you put a guard on me," she shot back, tears of rage blurring her vision. "Did you think I would not notice the car? The men who just happened to be walking down my street, you are just like him." The words hung in the air, a terrible, unforgivable accusation. His face hardened, the fury draining away, replaced by something much colder. "I am nothing like him. Are you not? You watch me. You control where I go. You use violence to get what you want. What is the difference?" Sebastian, a more expensive suit. She was sobbing now, hitting the soft leather of the seat. "I ran from that. I will not be owned again. I will not." Sebastian remained silent for a long time, the only sound the hum of the engine and her ragged breaths. He put the gun away, the click of the safety loud in the enclosed space. He reached out, not to touch her, but to tap on the partition. The driver did not slow down. "You think I want to control you," he said, his voice flat. "You are wrong. I want to keep you safe." "There is no safety with you," she cried. "There is just a different kind of danger. If you want to help me, if you actually have any feeling for me at all, then stop treating me like property. Stop solving my problems and start trusting me." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Trusting you," he repeated, as if the concept was foreign. "Trusting you is what gets you attacked in an alley." "No," Eva said, wiping her face, her voice low but fierce. "Trusting you is what got me attacked. He was not after me. He was after your girl, wasn't he? That is what this is. I am yours now. Am I not?" He had no answer. He simply looked away, out the window, a statue of cold fury. The conflict was no longer outside. It was here, in the car, trapped between them, and it was just beginning. The fragile truce forged in the back of the town car lasted less than 48 hours. The new locks on Eva's door, the ever-present car, the shadow men who were now stationed at either end of her street, these were all signs of Sebastian's protection. And to Eva, they were the bars of her cage. She argued with him, her voice hoarse with frustration, in the sterile silence of his office. "I am not your prisoner, Sebastian. I am not your jailer," he countered, his voice dangerously calm. "I am the man keeping you alive." The argument was a stalemate, a circular, bitter dance. And then, the past finally, fully broke through. It was not a man in a ski mask. It was a simple white envelope, slipped under her apartment door. It had no stamp, no address, just her name, her old name written on the front in a familiar, jagged script. Her blood ran cold before she even touched it. Her hands shook so badly she could barely tear it open. Inside, there was no letter, just a single, recent photograph. It was of Sebastian, standing on the mezzanine, looking down, his face a mask of cold concentration. On the back, 5 words were scrawled. "You left. He dies. Eva was not just scared. She was hollowed out. The air left her lungs, and she sank to the floor. The photograph clutched in her hand. Maxwell. He had found her. He had not just found her. He had been watching her. He knew who Sebastian was. He knew what he was to her. She had run from one monster, only to lead another, more pathetic but equally vicious, to the door of the man she was. What she was falling for. The realization hit her with the same force as the terror. She did not call the driver. She ran. She ran the 12 blocks to Vertigo in the late afternoon, her lungs burning, the photograph a piece of poison in her pocket. She stormed past the daytime cleaning crew, past a stunned Vivian, and up the private stairs to his office. She did not knock. She threw the door open. Sebastian was at his desk, on the phone. He looked up, his eyes instantly narrowing at the raw panic on her face. He spoke 2 sharp words in Italian into the phone and hung up, rising to his feet as she stumbled toward him. "Eva, what is it?" She could not speak. She just threw the photograph on his desk. He picked it up. He looked at the image, then flipped it over. His entire body went utterly still. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He did not ask who M was. He did not have to. He had seen the name in the files his security team had run on her. He had known from the very beginning the name of the man she was running from. "He was at my door," she choked out. "He's here. He's going to... Sebastian, he'll kill you." The look he gave her was almost one of pity. "Do you truly believe that?" "You don't know him," she cried, grabbing the lapels of his suit, her control shattering. "He's crazy. He's obsessive. He is an insect. Eva." His voice was a flat, cold line of absolute certainty. "He's an insect with a gun, and it's my fault. He's doing this because of me." She pounded her fists against his chest. "I have to go back. I'll go to him. I'll tell him." His hands shot up, grabbing her wrists. His grip was not gentle. It was a steel vice. "You will do nothing," he growled, his face inches from hers. "You are not going anywhere. This ends tonight." "No," she screamed. "No, you don't understand. I don't want you to solve him. Sebastian, I will not be the reason you become a murderer. I will not have his blood on my hands, or yours." The conflict in his eyes was a storm. He was warring, not with her, but with himself, with the dark, simple solution he knew, and the promise he'd half made to her in the car. "He threatened you," he said, his voice a low vibration. "He threatened you," she sobbed. "And I can't." "Go home, Eva," he said, his voice softening, his grip on her wrists easing. "Go to your apartment. Lock the door. My men will be outside. They will not let anyone in, not even me. I promise you." "Where are you going?" she whispered, terrified of the answer. "I'm going to handle this. Sebastian, please." He released her wrists, only to cup her face in his hands. His thumbs were rough against her tear-streaked skin. "He will not be dead, Eva, but he would be gone. I swear it to you." He kissed her forehead, a hard, brief press of his lips. "Now go." She did as she was told, her body numb, but as she sat in her triple-locked room, the sun setting, she knew she could not stay. She was not a victim to be protected. She was a participant. This was her fight, too. She did not know where Sebastian was going, but she knew where Maxwell was staying. His old habits were predictable. There was a cheap motel he always used on the outskirts of the city. She grabbed a cab, her heart hammering. She was not going to save Sebastian. She was going to save them both. She arrived at the motel just as a black town car was pulling away. She saw Sebastian, standing under the flickering neon sign, alone. He was in the parking lot, and just 10 feet from him, looking pale and shaking, was Maxwell. Sebastian was not holding a gun. He was holding a slim manila folder. "You are a ghost, Maxwell," Sebastian was saying, his voice carrying on the damp night air. "You have no job, no real credit, but you do have a great deal of offshore debt and a very unfortunate habit of skimming from your old employers. It would be a shame if the IRS and a few other associates were to find out exactly how much you have stolen." Maxwell was sweating. "You can't prove—" "I can," Sebastian cut him off. This folder contains your life, or what is left of it. You have 2 choices. You take the one-way plane ticket to Anchorage that is also in this folder and you start a new, miserable life. Or you stay, and I will not have to show this to the IRS. I will simply show it to the men you owe money to, and they will solve you. It was a masterclass in controlled power. He was destroying him with a pen, not a sword. Maxwell, seeing his entire pathetic life laid bare, snatched the folder. He looked at Sebastian with pure, unadulterated hatred, but also with terror. He scrambled into his car and sped off. He was gone. Eva stepped out of the shadows. Sebastian did not jump. He simply turned, his face unreadable in the neon light. He looked exhausted. "You should not be here," he said. "Neither should you," she whispered, her voice thick. She walked toward him, her steps unsteady. He stood, a dark, immovable statue. She reached him, her entire body shaking. You kept your promise." She breathed, the relief so profound it was painful. "He's gone. I thought—" She did not finish. She was done thinking. She ran the last 2 steps and crashed into his chest, her arms wrapping around his neck, burying her face in the expensive wool of his suit. For a second, he was rigid, unused to such a spontaneous, desperate embrace. Then, his arms came around her, pulling her so tightly against him it was hard to breathe. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt a shudder go through his entire frame. "You are shaking," she whispered, echoing his words from the alley. "He threatened me." He murmured against her scalp, his voice raw. "I did not care, but he threatened you, and I wanted to end him." "But you did not," she said, pulling back just enough to see his face. His gray eyes were on fire, the coldness gone, replaced by a blazing, possessive heat. "No," he said, his voice thick. "I did not." "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Do not thank me, Eva!" He growled. He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, tilting her head back. His gaze was intense, all-consuming, as if he were trying to memorize every line of her face. "This changes nothing," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. "It is still my world. It is still dangerous. I'm not afraid." She lied. Or maybe, for the first time, she was telling the truth. Not of this. He did not say, "I love you." He did not say, "I want you." He did not need to. His confession was in the bruising grip of his hand, in the desperation of his gaze. Then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the release of every moment of tension, every unspoken fear, every ounce of control he had held for weeks. It was hungry and angry and desperate. His lips were firm, demanding, and she met his intensity, her hands clinging to his shoulders. It was not the kiss of a boss or a protector. It was the kiss of a man who was drowning and had just found his only source of air. He tasted of power, of expensive whiskey, and of a loneliness so profound it mirrored her own. His arms were a warm, strong circle in the cold, dangerous night, a promise of a different kind of safety, one she was finally, terrifyingly, ready to accept. That kiss in the motel parking lot was a lit match dropped on gasoline. It consumed them both, a desperate, raw affirmation in the face of death and fear. The ride back to her apartment was thick with a new, palpable tension. It was no longer the silence of a boss and his employee. It was the charged silence of 2 people who had crossed a line and had no idea what was on the other side. When the car stopped, he did not just let her out, he got out with her. He walked her to her door, his hand on her back, a silent, non-negotiable presence, at her door, under the harsh hallway light. He paused. "He will not find you again," Sebastian said, his voice low. "I know," Eva replied, and for the first time, the words were true, not because Maxwell was scared, but because she was no longer the same woman. The confrontation at the motel, watching Sebastian dismantle her past not with a bullet but with a file, had changed something in her. She had been running, desperate to be invisible. But Sebastian had seen her, truly seen her, and had not turned away. She realized, standing there, that running was no longer an option. She had to face the world she was in, and the man standing in front of her. "What you did," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The way you handled him, without violence," he finished, his tone flat. "It is not always my first instinct or my second. It is the only way it will work. Sebastian, for me, for this." He looked at her, his gray eyes searching. He saw the new strength in her, the fear replaced by a fragile resolve. "My world is what it is, Eva, but I will not lie to you. The old ways are clean, but they are final. What I did tonight was more difficult, but perhaps," he added, almost to himself, "more permanent, for my family's future, and for me." She finished for him. He nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. It was a promise, a vow to change, to try, not just for her, but for the safety of an entire structure he was responsible for. That night, she did not go into her apartment alone. He followed her, and in the tiny, safe box that had once been her fortress against the world, Eva finally opened her own file. She sat on her mattress. He sat on the single wooden chair, and she told him everything. Not just the story of the bruises, but the story of the control. She told him how Maxwell had made her feel small, how he had isolated her from her friends, how he had convinced her she was worthless. She spoke of the constant, creeping terror, the walking on eggshells, the loss of her own identity until she was just a reflection of his rage. Sebastian listened. He did not interrupt. He did not move. He just watched her. His face a mask, but his hands, she noted, were clenched so tightly on his knees his knuckles were white. When she was finished, a long, heavy silence filled the room. "He did not just hurt you," Sebastian said, his voice thick with a cold, precise rage. "He tried to erase you." "He almost did," she whispered. He stood and knelt in front of her, so they were at eye level. "He failed," Sebastian said, cupping her face, his gaze burning into hers. "And no one will ever try again." Life shifted. Eva still worked at Vertigo, but she was no longer just staff. She was a presence, an extension of him. He taught her the business, not just the front of house, but the real business, the numbers, the investments, the delicate balance of power and legitimacy. And she, in turn, taught him. She taught him patience, and that sometimes, a soft word was more effective than a threat. About a month later, he took her out, not to Vertigo, not to one of his own properties, but to a quiet, ridiculously expensive French restaurant on the Upper East Side, a place of soft lights and hushed waiters. "What are we celebrating?" she asked, smoothing the silk dress he had had sent to her apartment, which was now a much larger, much safer penthouse apartment in his own building. "An armistice," he said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. They ate, they talked, not about business, but about her, about a future she was finally allowing herself to imagine. Then, with dessert, the waiter did not bring a menu. He brought a single, velvet box. Eva's breath caught. Sebastian took the box. He did not get on one knee. That was not his style. He simply opened it and slid it across the table. Inside was not a gaudy, blood diamond-sized stone. It was an antique ring, an intricate white gold setting with a single, clear, luminous sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough. "She said it was for the woman who would be my anchor, not just my prize, the one who would challenge me, not just obey me." His eyes met hers, and all the coldness was gone, replaced by a deep, vulnerable warmth she had only seen glimpses of. "I am not an easy man, Eva. My world is not a kind one, but it is a safer one with you in it, and I am a better man for knowing you." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Marry me. Be my partner. Be my anchor." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. That night, back at the penthouse, the commitment was sealed. They stood by the great windows. The city lights spread out below them like a carpet of jewels. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her waist. "There are no more locks, Eva," he whispered. "Only this." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the motel. It was a kiss of profound intimacy, a slow, deep exploration. It was a promise, a contract, a complete and total surrender of the control he held so dear. His touch was reverent as he undressed her, as if he were unwrapping something infinitely precious, and she, in turn, was not afraid. Her hands, which had once been raised in defense, now moved to his face, to his shoulders, pulling him closer. This was not just passion, it was a fusion. It was the place where her trauma met his darkness and found, impossibly, a place of peace. When they finally came together, it was a quiet, earth-shattering collision of two souls who had been worlds apart and had found their center in each other. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated acceptance. He was hers, and she was his, and for the first time in either of their lives, they were both, completely and truly, free. The sapphire ring on her finger was not a chain, but a key. It unlocked a world Eva had never known existed, and it unlocked a side of Sebastian she had not thought possible. The first and most profound change was the nature of her safety. The men were still there. The black cars still idled on the streets near her, but they were no longer a secret. They were her detail. Sebastian had introduced her to the head of his security, a former Special Forces operative named Sal, who now spoke to her directly about her schedule, her routes, her preferences. Mr. Moretti insists on a 2-car follow, ma'am, Sal had said, his face impassive, but I recommended a less visible, a street vendor team. Perhaps you would have eyes on, but without the high-profile signature. Eva had looked at him, surprised. That sounds much better. Sal, thank you. She realized, with a jolt, that Sebastian's control had not been about suffocation. It had been about genuine, if misguided, care. He was a man who saw the world in terms of threats and vulnerabilities. He had seen her as a vulnerability to be shielded. Now, with the ring on her finger. He saw her as a partner to be secured. The shift was subtle, but it was everything. He was not trying to hide her from the world. He was trying to keep the world from harming her. The bigger change, however, was in the boardroom, not the bedroom. He began to bring her into the inner sanctum. Vertigo was just the beautiful, glittering tip of the iceberg. The Moretti family's real power was in real estate, in logistics, in holding companies so legitimate they were traded on the stock exchange. One afternoon, she sat in on a meeting in his main office, not the club, but a sprawling, glass-walled suite in a downtown skyscraper. Sebastian was there with his uncle, a quiet, older man named Antonio, and 3 lawyers. They were discussing a hostile takeover bid for a shipping company. The Rinaldi family is bleeding us, Antonio said, his voice a gravelly whisper. They are poaching our drivers, driving up the fuel costs artificially. It is a war of attrition. They see our new ventures as an encroachment, Sebastian said, his face dark. They want a reaction. They want me to put a man in the ground so they can cry foul to the commission. So, we give them what they want. One of the lawyers, a man with a shark's smile, suggested. Sebastian was about to reply when he caught Eva's eye. She was sitting quietly, taking notes, as she had been for weeks. "You are quiet," he said. All eyes in the room turned to her. It was a test. Eva put down her pen. "You are looking at it like a street fight," she said, and her voice even. "But the Rinaldis are not using fists. They are using the market. Why fight them in the alley when you can beat them in the press?" Antonio raised a skeptical eyebrow. "They are poaching drivers." "Yes," Eva continued, gaining confidence. "They are creating a shortage. So, we expose it. We release a statement about a sudden, organized labor disruption. We paint ourselves as the victims of an anti-competitive, illegal effort to strong-arm a legitimate business. We do not name the Rinaldis. We do not have to. We just feed the story to the business journals. We let the Federal Trade Commission ask the questions, not our soldiers. We fight with light, not with darkness." The room was silent. The shark lawyer looked stunned. Sebastian stared at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was not a smile of coldness. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. "Antonio," Sebastian said, never taking his eyes off Eva, "get our communications team. Tell them to draft a statement, miss. Pierce will be approving the final copy." It was a new kind of war, and they fought it together. Eva, who had spent years making herself small and invisible, was now the strategic mind behind the Moretti family's biggest legitimate push. She was brilliant at it. She saw the angles Sebastian, with his old-world training, had always missed. He saw power as a fortress. She taught him to wield it as a scalpel. The Rinaldis were blindsided. They were prepared for a war of bullets and blood, not one of press releases and regulatory oversight. Within 3 weeks, they were not just on the defensive, they were drowning in audits and federal investigations. They had tried to overthrow the Moretti family and had instead handed them a bloodless, public victory. That night, Sebastian did not take her to dinner. He took her back to Vertigo, long after it had closed. The main floor was dark, silent, save for a single piano player in the corner, playing a soft, melancholic jazz piece just for them. They danced, alone in the center of the vast, empty room. He held her close, his hand warm on the small of her back, the sapphire on her finger catching a stray beam of moonlight. "You were magnificent today," he murmured, his lips against her hair. "You routed them, Eva, utterly." "We routed them," she corrected softly, leaning her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You had the power. I just aimed it." He stopped dancing, pulling back just enough to look at her. "For 20 years, I have been trained to see every problem as a nail that requires a hammer. I built walls of steel and stone. I thought that was protection." He reached up, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You are made of something stronger." "What is that?" she whispered. "You are not afraid to be vulnerable. You are not afraid to trust. I thought my life meant I could never have that I could only protect, never share, that I could only control, never respect." He took her hand, the one with his mother's ring, and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You were right," he said, and the admission from a man like him was as powerful as any vow. "It is not the walls, it is not the soldiers, it is this, the love, the respect. That is the key. That is the only thing that will ever keep us safe." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes, and pulled his head down to hers. Their commitment was no longer just about love. It was about partnership, a bond forged in mutual respect that was stronger than any mafia family and more secure than any fortress. The victory over the Rinaldis was bloodless, but it was not clean. It had been a victory of spreadsheets, press releases, and legal threats, but the foundation of the Moretti world remained. It was a world built on a history of violence, and Eva, despite her new role and the sapphire on her finger, was beginning to feel the weight of that history pressing in. She stood on the terrace of the penthouse, the city lights a silent, glittering audience. It was almost dawn. Sebastian was inside, sleeping a deep, exhausted sleep she envied. He had been a different man these past few weeks, energized by her strategies, proud of their shared victories. But she had seen the cost. She had seen it in the way he still checked the armored door, in the low, terse phone calls he still took in Italian, the ones that ended in a sharp, final click. She loved him. That was a fact as solid as the concrete beneath her feet. She loved his intensity, his fierce, broken method of protection, and the profound vulnerability he showed only to her. But she was terrified of his world. She had escaped a life of walking on eggshells with Maxwell, only to find herself in a diamond-encrusted fortress where a single misstep could mean a war. The internal conflict was a knife twist in her gut. She did not want to live in a world of bodyguards and solvable problems. She did not want to raise children who would need to be taught about security details before they were taught to ride a bike. But the thought of leaving him, of walking away from the only man who had ever seen her as strong instead of weak, that was an agony she could not bear. He came up behind her, silent as he always was. He had not been sleeping. He had been watching her. He slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against the warmth of his bare chest. He wore nothing but a pair inky black pajama pants, and his skin was warm against the cool night air. "You are 1,000 miles away," he murmured, his lips brushing the side of her neck. Eva leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I am right here, Sebastian, but I am scared." His arms tightened. "Of what no one can touch you. I will burn the world down before I let anyone." "I am not scared of the world," she interrupted, turning in his arms to face him. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and violet, matching the color of his eyes. "I'm scared of this. Of us." His face hardened. "I do not understand." "This life," she whispered, her hands coming up to frame his jaw. His skin was rough with morning stubble. "We won. We beat the Rinaldis. But what about the next family? And the one after that? How long can we keep fighting with press releases? Sebastian, before you are forced to fight with bullets? The question hung in the air between them, cold and sharp. I will do what is necessary to protect my family, he said, his voice flat. And I am your family now, she pleaded. So you have to listen to me. I cannot be the wife of a man who does that. I cannot live with the fear that one day you will go to a meeting and never come back. I cannot. His expression was one of profound conflict. What are you asking me to do, Eva? This is not a job I can quit. It is my name. It is my blood. Then change what the name means, she urged, her voice breaking. You said I was your anchor. Then let me be. Let us leave. Leave. He looked stunned. Leave New York. Leave the family. Leave the violence, she clarified. Sell Vertigo. Sell the other businesses. We have enough, Sebastian. You have your legitimate holdings. We could go to Italy, to London. We could just be us. He looked away from her, out at the city that was his kingdom. You're asking me to abdicate, he said, and the word was full of ice. To run. The Rinaldis would be back in a day. My uncle. My cousins, they would be slaughtered. The Rinaldis would see it as weakness. You would not just be robbing me of my power, you would be handing my family a death sentence. His words hit her like a slap. He was right. There was no clean escape. That night, their lovemaking was not the fiery collision of their first kiss, nor the tender fusion of their engagement. It was a desperate, almost somber act of clinging to each other. They were in his vast bed, the sheets a tangle of white linen around them. His touch was firm, his hands mapping her body as if to memorize her, as if she were already slipping away. And her kisses were not just kisses, they were questions. She kissed his jaw, his shoulders, the faint scars she had found on his torso. She held him, her entire body wrapped around him, as if she could physically shield him from the world he was bound to. It was a quiet, intense, and heartbreakingly gentle affair, each touch and whisper freighted with the anxiety of their impossible choice. There was no passion, only a profound, aching love. Do not ask me to choose between you and my blood, he whispered into the darkness, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard, because I will choose you, and it will destroy us all. She lay awake long after his breathing had evened out. He had given her his answer. He could not leave, and she knew, in that dark, quiet moment, that she could not leave him. The next morning, she found him in his study, staring at a map of the city. I am not going to ask you to leave, she said, her voice clear and strong. He turned, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. I am going to ask you to change, she continued. She walked to him, taking his hand. I choose you, Sebastian, but I choose all of us, your family, your name, our future. And that future cannot be built on the old ways. That is my condition. He frowned. What condition? I will marry you. I will be your partner. I will stand with you against anyone. But you must promise me, truly promise me, that the violence stops. The other businesses. You liquidate them. You move the money. You legitimize everything. We use the model we used against the Rinaldis for everything, Eva. That is a 10-year plan, he said, stunned. It would be seen as smart, she finished. As the future, you will be the first dawn to build an empire that the law cannot touch. You will not be a gangster. Sebastian, you will be a king, but you will do it my way. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing not the woman he had to protect, but the woman who would stand beside him, a true queen. He brought her hand to his lips, his gray eyes intense. An empire, he said, a slow smile dawning on his face, built on love and respect. She smiled back, her own resolve hardening. And a very, very good legal team. We are in this together, but we are building a future. Sebastian, not just surviving a war. He pulled her into his arms. A future. He agreed. And for the first time, the word did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The Great Pivot, as Antonio Moretti came to call it, began not with a bang, but with a spreadsheet. Eva's 10-year plan became a 5-year mission. The transition was seismic. Sebastian, true to his word, began the arduous process of untangling the Moretti family from its darker roots. It was a surgical, delicate operation, run with the precision he had once reserved for war. Ava, now Ava Moretti, after a quiet ceremony at City Hall, was not just his wife. She was the architect of their new empire. She sat at the head of the long boardroom table, the sapphire on her finger a flash of color against the dark mahogany. She was the chief operating officer of Moretti Global Holdings, a conglomerate that now aggressively prioritized logistics, high-end hospitality, and private equity. Vertigo was the first to change. It was still exclusive, still the beating heart of New York nightlife, but it was now also the flagship of a dozen other Moretti-owned properties, all run with legitimate, transparent books. The other businesses, the loan sharking, the gambling rings, the networks of intimidation were systematically starved, sold off, or simply dissolved. Sebastian, for his part, handled the fallout. The old ways did not die quietly. There were tense meetings in steakhouses, visits from old friends who did not understand the new direction. But where Sebastian would once have met their threats with his own, he now met them with Eva's strategies. He did not offer violence. He offered buyouts. He did not threaten. He presented non-negotiable contracts. He traded favors for severance packages. It was a quiet, brutal, and bloodless dismantling of a world, and he did it all to keep his promise to her. Their life found a new rhythm, one built on shared purpose. Their mornings were not spent in bed. They were spent in their shared home office. Two powerful figures silhouetted against the sunrise, cups of coffee in hand, already deep in the day's business. He taught her about loyalty, about the weight of a family name, about the unwritten codes of honor that, even in his new world, still mattered. She taught him about trust in systems, about the power of public perception, and about the quiet strength of forgiveness. Their love, which had been forged in fear and desperation, now deepened into something profound and unshakable. It was a love built on mutual respect. He no longer saw her as someone to protect. He saw her as his equal, his partner, his most trusted advisor, and she no longer saw him as a dark, controlling force, but as a man of profound integrity who was willing to change the very essence of his world for her. The staff, who had once feared him, now respected him. But they adored Eva. She knew all their names, their families. She implemented a benefits package, a scholarship fund for their children. She was building an empire, but she was doing it with a humanity the Moretti family had never known. Their evenings were their sanctuary. The city lights were no longer a backdrop for war, but for peace. One night, she found him standing on the terrace, not in one of his bespoke suits, but in a simple cashmere sweater, his hands resting on the stone balustrade. He looked calm. It was a look she had never seen on him in the beginning, and it was now the one she cherished most. She came up behind him, sliding her arms around his waist, just as he had once done to her. She pressed her cheek against the soft wool of his back. "You are 1,000 miles away," she whispered, echoing his own words from a lifetime ago. He turned in her embrace, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. His gray eyes were no longer cold, but warm, the color of a soft morning fog. "No," he murmured, his lips finding her hair. "I am right here. I was just thinking that for the first time in my life. I am not planning a defense. I am just enjoying the view." He tilted her chin up, his thumb tracing her jawline. "You did this," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that still humbled her. "You brought me peace. Eva, we built it together," she whispered. He kissed her, and the kiss was a testament to their new life. It was not the desperate, consuming fire of their first encounters. It was a slow, deep, and infinitely tender exploration. It was the kiss of a man who was completely, devastatingly, and contentedly in love. His lips were soft, his touch gentle, as if he still could not believe she was real. His hands moved from her face down to her shoulders, sliding down her arms, lacing his fingers with hers. He led her inside, away from the window, into the warm, soft light of their living room. There was no urgency, no desperation, only a deep, abiding need to be close. He undressed her slowly, his gaze a reverent caress. He was not claiming a prize, he was worshiping an equal. Every touch, every whispered word was a recommitment. "I love you, Eva Moretti," he said, his voice raw as he lifted her into his arms. "I love you, Sebastian Moretti," she breathed, her hands locking behind his neck. Their union was a sweet, lingering dance, a quiet celebration of the life they had built. It was a testament to a love that had not just survived the darkness, but had transformed it, creating a new, stronger, and far more brilliant light. Their relationship was no longer just a commitment. It was a living, breathing covenant of peace, a promise that together they were truly and finally safe. Their City Hall ceremony had been a legal formality, a quiet signature on a piece of paper that bound their assets. But their wedding, the one that mattered, came 6 months later. It was not at a grand cathedral or a lavish ballroom. Sebastian, in a move that signaled the true death of the old ways, had arranged it at a small, private vineyard he had purchased in upstate New York, a place of rolling hills and quiet, clean air. There were fewer than 20 people. Antonio was there, his weathered face finally relaxed in a genuine smile. Natasha, in a stunning emerald green dress, served as Ava's maid of honor. Sal, his security chief, stood as Sebastian's best man, his suit jacket only barely concealing the equipment that was his constant companion. Ava wore a simple, cream-colored silk dress that skimmed her body, her hair loose and flowing. The only jewelry she wore was the sapphire on her finger and a simple string of pearls from Sebastian's mother, a gift from Antonio. As she walked down a simple aisle of mown grass, Sebastian stood waiting for her under an old oak tree. He was not in a black tuxedo. He wore a perfectly tailored suit of dark, navy blue, and his gray eyes, as they met hers, held nothing but a profound, overwhelming love. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, not promises of power or protection, but promises of partnership, of respect, and of a shared future. When he kissed her, it was with a gentle, certain finality. This was not a merger. It was a union, complete and absolute. They had built it. They had truly built a peaceful, happy life from the ruins of their respective pasts. 2 years passed, and their new world solidified, and the Moretti Global Holdings was a pillar of the New York business community, its reputation for ruthless efficiency now replaced by one of brilliant, unassailable strategy. Eva's name was mentioned in business journals with a respect that bordered on awe. Sebastian, in turn, had become one of the city's most powerful and most legitimate philanthropists. Their final scene was not one of drama, but of a deep, abiding peace. It was a Sunday morning. The penthouse, once a fortress, was now a home. The sound of small feet, a clumsy, stumbling run, echoed on the hardwood floors. A little boy, just over a year old, with his mother's bright eyes and his father's dark, serious brow, toppled into the living room, giggling. Eva, in a soft white robe, scooped him up, kissing his chubby cheek. "Well, good morning. Leo, did you let your papa sleep?" Sebastian emerged from the kitchen, not in a suit, but in worn gray sweatpants and a Henley. He was holding a bottle of milk. He had dark circles under his eyes, but his smile was one of complete, unguarded happiness. "He did not," Sebastian said, his voice rough with sleep as he kissed his wife, a long, lingering, and familiar kiss. "He has your energy, and your complete disregard for a reasonable hour." Eva laughed, shifting the baby into his arms. "He has your stubbornness. He would not rest until I agreed to let him have pancakes." Sebastian held his son, his gaze softening as the little boy babbled and reached for his father's unshaven jaw. This was the man who had once commanded an army of shadows. now completely undone by a 12-pound tyrant. Eva walked to the great windows, looking out at the city. It was a bright, clear morning, the sunlight glinting off the buildings. Sebastian came to stand beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist, their son nestled securely between them. "Look at that," Sebastian said, his voice quiet. "Our city. It is a good city today," Eva replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is," he agreed. They stood in silence for a long moment, a family. The bodyguards were gone, or at least, they were so far removed they were no longer a presence in their lives. The fear was gone. The ghosts of Maxwell and the Rinaldis and 100 other threats had long since faded, replaced by the immediate, wonderful reality of early mornings and pancake debates. Their relationship was no longer about power, or control, or even just protection. It was about sharing. It was about him taking the night feeding so she could prepare for a board meeting. It was about her knowing, with a single look, when the pressures of his past were weighing on him and pulling him back into the light of their present, they were a team, a true, equal partnership. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked at her, his gray eyes clear. "I was thinking," he said, "that I am a very lucky man." "We are lucky," she corrected, her hand coming up to rest over his on their son's back. "No," Sebastian insisted, his voice a low, soft vow. "You were the one who had the strength. You were the one who taught me. You gave me this. You gave me freedom. Happiness, freedom, and love. They were no longer abstract concepts they had been chasing or running from. They were not things they had achieved and put on a shelf. They were the air they breathed, the foundation they stood on, and the promise of every morning to come. They were the quiet, unshakable truth of the life they had built together. A life they would cherish and protect forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let us know so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and like this video. It truly helps. And if you want to support us even more, please press that hype button to help this story get heard by more people.